With optimism for the American economy increasing in some voters' minds after the new presidential administration took place, the fact remains that inflation still continues to plague U.S. consumer spending. The combination of inflation and high interest rates has caused food prices, in particular, to continue to soar. The cost of eggs in December 2024 increased by 182%, while ground beef increased 41%, whole chicken 30%, and milk 18%. With wages for workers remaining stagnant, there's just not much wiggle room. The overall effects to the U.S. economy bleed over into many aspects of consumer spending. For example, most Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency room visit expense, according to a survey done by the company Bankrate. The same can be said for car repairs of $1,000 or more. Many respondents said they would have to use credit cards to pay for emergency expenses. This already when consumer credit card debt is already at all-time highs. Mark Hamrick, senior economic analyst at Bankrate, says we are essentially a paycheck-to-paycheck nation. He also said fewer Americans have the equivalent of a financial safety net to cover inevitable, unexpected expenses, despite low unemployment and steady economic growth. In Bankrate's study, around three-quarters of respondents said they were saving less to meet unforeseen expenses because of inflation, high interest rates, or a change in income or employment status. The Trump administration says hardworking families today are overwhelmed by the cost of fuel, food, housing, automobiles, medical care, utilities, and insurance. In early January 2025, government officials began looking for ways to reduce housing costs and boost supply, lower health care and appliance costs, and they scrapped environmental policies that are raising the cost of goods. It's still too early to see any substantial effects to these policy changes. One thing that hasn't changed is the reliance Americans have come to depend on using food banks. The food banks represent a post-pandemic wave of demand for food driven by working-class people caught in America's cost of living crunch. Called by many as this new era of food insecurity, according to Emily Engelhard, Vice President of Research at Feeding America. She said this isn't an unemployment issue, explaining that as prices have risen, so have the share of Americans reporting they don't have enough to eat. And despite a fairly good growing economy and historically low unemployment, those figures remain elevated in 2024, as U.S. Census data showed. The inflation surge that has driven food insecurity among working people is partly the result of one of the biggest policy experiments in decades. Faced with a global pandemic and the risk of a deeply damaged economy, the U.S. government passed roughly $5 trillion in stimulus and relief measures between March 2020 and March 2021. Among other things, the aid kept many workers on payrolls and helped small businesses stay afloat. But the aid, in many cases, just wasn't enough. The Flagstaff Family Food Center in Arizona broke records in 2022, serving almost 28,000 meals per month on average. Food Center President Ethan Amos said that at first it was exhilarating, then it became exhausting. We expected things to slow down, but it never did. The Food Center now serves over 40,000 meals per month, using the same equipment and space it started with in 2015, when it served 127,000 meals for the entire year. On the other side of the country, Capital Area Food Bank distributed 64 million meals last fiscal year in Washington and the neighboring areas, 5 million more than the prior year. Their research showed the sharpest increases in food insecurity in the area were in households earning about $100,000 to $150,000. I'll hope the economy and the bad effects of inflation will soon drastically improve. This is H.A. Graves.